There's a kind of question that football federations almost never have to answer in public. Not who should start, not which formation to use, not how to rebuild after a group stage exit. A different kind of question entirely. One that goes to the heart of what sport is for, what it owes to the world it operates in, and where the line sits between football's role as a unifier and its role as something else. The question is this: should we go? In the first weeks of 2026, that question was put, publicly and seriously, to three of the most powerful football associations in Europe: Germany, the Netherlands, France, three nations that between them have won the World Cup 4 times, reached the final 8 times, and produced some of the greatest players and moments the tournament has ever seen. Three nations whose football cultures are so deeply embedded in their national identities that the idea of them not attending a World Cup is for most fans simply incomprehensible. And yet, the question was asked. In newspaper interviews, in parliamentary petitions, in federation executive meetings, in government press conferences. It was asked formally, seriously, with people putting their names to it and their institutions behind it. And the way each of the three nations responded, the speed of their answer, the language they chose, the reasoning they offered, tells you something important about where European football is in 2026 and about the relationship between the sport and the world outside it. This is the story of how those three debates happened, how they started, what drove them, what was said, and how they ended. It's a story worth telling properly because it happened. It was real, and the football world hasn't yet fully absorbed what it means. Start with Germany, because Germany went first, and Germany went loudest. On January 24, 2026, a man named Oke Goodlick sat down with the Hamburger Morgenpost newspaper and said something that no senior European football official had said publicly in the modern era of the sport. He said the time had come to seriously consider and discuss a boycott of the 2026 World Cup. Goodlick is not a fringe figure. He is the president of FC St. Pauli, a club with one of the most distinctive cultural identities in German football, known across the continent for its values and its community. He is also one of 10 vice presidents of the DFB, the German Football Association. He is not a protester outside a stadium. He is an elected member of the governing committee of one of the most powerful football federations in Europe. He invoked the 1980 Moscow Olympics. He asked what the justifications were for those boycotts and whether the situation in early 2026 was any less serious. He named FIFA's president. He named the DFB's president. He asked explicitly what their threshold was. When exactly does a taboo get crossed? Within hours, the German football world was divided. Some voices backed him. Others, including DFB president Bernd Neuendorf, pushed back strongly. The federation announced it would hold a formal executive committee meeting to discuss the question. That meeting happened. It is documented. Senior football administrators from Germany's most important football institution sat in a room and debated whether their national team should attend the World Cup. The specifics of that room, what was said, what arguments were made, which way the sentiment ran before the vote, remain private. What was made public was the outcome. On January 31st, 7 days after Goodlick's interview, the DFB issued a statement. We believe in the unifying power of sport and the global impact that a FIFA World Cup can have. Our goal is to strengthen this positive force, not to prevent it. No boycott. Germany are going. But embedded in the statement was something else, a line that read as a quiet but unmistakable message to Goodlick himself. Debates on sports policy of this kind should be conducted internally, not in public. He had gone to the press. The federation had answered with a communiqué. It was a formal moment, handled with the careful language of an institution that understood exactly what was at stake on both sides of the question. France's conversation happened on a different timetable and with a different emotional register. Where Germany's debate was driven from inside the federation, France's was driven from outside it, from the political sphere. from journalists, from public figures who wanted the federation to take a position it had not volunteered. The question arrived on France's doorstep on January 22, 9 days before Germany's formal ruling. Marina Ferrari, France's Minister of Sports, was asked directly at a press conference whether France was considering a boycott of the 2026 World Cup. She answered it the way French ministers often answer difficult questions, with precision and with a careful qualification. As it stands now, she said, there is no desire from the ministry for a boycott of this great competition. Then she added the line that journalists noted. That said, I will not anticipate. 4 words, I will not anticipate. In the context of a minister being asked whether her country will attend the World Cup, those 4 words are significant. They don't close the door entirely. They leave a gap, narrow, but visible. In January 2026, France's official position was no desire to boycott, combined with an acknowledgement that circumstances could change. They didn't change. France confirmed participation. Their squad was named on May 14th. Didier Deschamps, in his farewell tournament after 13 years, leads them to North America with what FIFA's own rankings list as the best squad in the world. Mbappé is the captain. Dembélé won the Ballon d'Or this season. The football has long since overtaken the political debate.
But what's worth sitting with about France's response is the date, January 22nd. France's minister was answering questions about a potential boycott of a football tournament more than 4 months before that tournament began. That is how early this conversation arrived. And the fact that a sports minister of one of the world's great footballing nations had to address it directly, in public, at a press conference, on the record, tells you something about the environment around this World Cup that no amount of commercial optimism from FIFA can paper over. The Netherlands is the third story, and in some ways it's the richest of the 3. It started not with a football official and not with a government minister, but with a journalist. Toon van de Kuiken is a well-known name in Dutch media, an investigative journalist and documentary maker with a track record of using public campaigns to drive political conversations. He launched a petition. He put his name to it. He made a direct argument. By sending the Dutch national team to the United States this summer, the Netherlands would be legitimizing something it should not be legitimizing. He asked the KNVB, the Dutch government, and the players themselves to reconsider. The petition moved faster than anyone anticipated. Within days, it had passed 100,000 signatures. By the time it was formally submitted to the Dutch Parliament on March 24th, it carried 174,000 names. That number deserves a moment of consideration. 174,000 people in a country of 17 million actively submitting their names to a parliamentary document asking their national football team not to attend the World Cup. That is not a social media reaction. That is a mobilization. And it worked in a specific and meaningful sense. Not in the sense that the Netherlands withdrew, they didn't, and they were never going to, but in the sense that the KNVB was forced to engage with it seriously, to meet with government officials and embassies in FIFA, to issue statements that were carefully constructed, and to speak in language that made their discomfort audible even inside their confirmation of participation. Frank Pauw, the KNVB's president, said the Netherlands would not boycott, and then added the phrase, so far. 2 words, so far. Not, we are going, not, this decision is final, so far. It was the language of an institution that had made a decision it wasn't entirely at peace with, and that wanted to leave the smallest possible door open in case circumstances changed further. The KNVB's Secretary General issued a formal statement on the official website. He said the organization was alert and flexible, that it was monitoring international developments, that the players' ability to focus on football remained the top priority. And then he said something that functioned as both a football statement and an argument for participation. Nothing unites the Dutch people more strongly than the national team. That last line was doing important work. It was saying the national team being at the World Cup is itself an act of national identity. It is what brings people together, regardless of the divisions that surround them. Removing that, withdrawing from the tournament, would take something away from the Dutch people without sending a meaningful message to anyone outside the country. The Netherlands' main national team sponsor, ING, declined to comment on whether they would maintain their support in a boycott scenario. That kind of non-answer from a financial sponsor tells you they genuinely didn't know the answer during the period when the question was live. Now step back from all three of these stories and look at what they have in common, because the connection is worth articulating. In each case, the conversation happened in January or February of this year. In each case, it was triggered not by a single event, but an accumulation: travel bans affecting fans of competing nations, visa complications for federation officials, concerns about the security environment for international visitors, and a broader sense among some voices in European football that the sport was not asking itself hard enough questions about where it was going and what it was endorsing by going there. In each case, the governing body of that nation's football ultimately answered no to the boycott, and in each case they did so while acknowledging, in language that ranged from careful to quietly painful, that the questions being raised were not trivial. Germany's statement about the unifying power of sport was beautiful language. It was also, in its specific context, a statement that had to work harder than it would have done in any previous World Cup cycle. France's minister saying she wouldn't anticipate what might happen was not equivocation, it was honesty about uncertainty. The Netherlands, so far, was perhaps the most transparent of all, an institution saying, "This is our answer for now, and we reserve the right to have a different answer if the world changes." In the history of the World Cup, no three nations of this stature have been simultaneously forced to publicly address a boycott question in the months before a tournament they were attending. Not in 1982, not in 1994, not in 2014, not even in the years when the boycott conversations were loudest, around Moscow 1980 or Los Angeles 1984 for the Summer Olympics, did major European football federations find themselves having these discussions in their executive boardrooms.
What changed? The specific reasons are particular to 2026 and to the conditions the tournament is operating under, but underneath the specifics is a broader shift that anyone who has been watching football for decades has probably sensed building for a while. The expectation that football is separate from the world, that what happens in geopolitics, in human rights, in the relationship between nations, stays outside the stadium is eroding. It eroded through Qatar 2022, through Russia 2018, through decade after decade of governing body decisions that generated scrutiny they hadn't previously faced. And in 2026, three of Europe's most powerful football nations had to sit in rooms and answer a question that would have seemed almost fictional 20 years ago. For the players, the debate passed largely in the background. Florian Wirtz prepared for his first World Cup. Virgil van Dijk and Cody Gakpo continued their preparations, knowing their country's federation was publicly managing a petition with their name on it. The French squad went through the rigors of late-season club football, knowing the boycott question had been asked and answered, but understanding that the context in which they'd compete was more complicated than previous tournaments. None of them publicly backed the boycott movements in their respective countries. None of them publicly opposed them either, with any force. The players, almost universally, let their federations speak. That silence is itself worth noting. In 2022, when Germany's squad covered their mouths in a team photo before their opening match against Japan, it was a moment of visible collective expression. In 2026, the German squad and the Dutch squad and the French squad have been largely quiet on the questions that swirled around their federations in January. Whether that's comfort with the decision that was made, discomfort with the politics of expressing a view, or simply a desire to focus on the football, only the people inside those dressing rooms know. Where does all of this leave us, 14 days from the opening ceremony in Mexico City? Germany are going, with Florian Wirtz and Manuel Neuer recalled from retirement at 40 years old in one of the more extraordinary selection stories of this World Cup, leading a squad that Julian Nagelsmann has built to compete from the first match. They faced Curaçao, Ivory Coast, and Ecuador in a manageable group. After 2 consecutive group stage exits, the conversation inside German football is no longer about whether they'll attend. It's about whether they'll still be playing in late July. The Netherlands are going, with Virgil van Dijk, Cody Gakpo, Ryan Gravenberch, and a squad that is, on paper, good enough to reach the final. The group puts them against Japan, Sweden, and Tunisia. The KNVB is in contact with embassies and with FIFA. Their president said so far. The football continues. France are going,
with the world's top-ranked squad in what Deschamps has confirmed will be his farewell as manager. Mbappé is the captain. Dembélé won the Ballon d'Or. Kanté and Zaire Emery cover the midfield. Saliba marshals the defense. France want a third World Cup title. The boycott question was asked and answered. The football has taken over. 3 nations, 3 conversations, 3 outcomes that were, on reflection, almost structurally inevitable, because FIFA's statutes and the financial architecture of international football make formal federation withdrawal from a scheduled World Cup something close to impossible without extraordinary cause. But the conversations that happened on the way to that inevitable outcome were not nothing. They were the football world doing something it does rarely and reluctantly, looking at itself in the mirror and asking whether it likes what it sees. Not everyone liked the answer. The 174,000 Dutch signatories didn't like the answer. Oak Gottlieb, who raised the question and was told by his own federation to keep such debates internal, didn't entirely like the answer. Sepp Blatter, who posted publicly on January 27th and said avoid the United States, didn't like the answer. But the football is happening. The squads are named, the planes are booked. Germany and the Netherlands and France are heading to North America with genuine ambitions, genuine talent, and genuine complexity in the background. The boycott question was asked, and football, as it almost always does, chose to play. I'd genuinely like to know what you think. Was the right decision made by all 3 federations when they chose participation over protest? Or is there a part of you that thinks football missed something this winter, that the conversations that happened in those executive boardrooms should have reached a different conclusion? There's no clean answer to that question, but it's the kind of question that people who have loved this game for decades deserve to sit with. Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one. And if you were one of the 174,000 Dutch signatories, or if you were following the German debate closely, tell me what you felt when the federations confirmed they were going. If this kind of football journalism is worth your time, a like helps more than you'd think. Subscribe if you want to follow Germany, the Netherlands, and France, and every other team in this tournament all the way from June 11th to July 19th. 14 days. The question was asked. The answer was given. Football at this scale is never just a tournament. It's a moment in time, and 2026 is going to be one of them.